Have you ever wondered about people from the past who just vanished? Or whose way of life was so different, so unusual, that we still scratch our heads trying to figure them out? What if some of these lost communities had ideas about being single, or about relationships and family, that were totally unlike our own? Could entire groups of people have thrived without what we think of as normal family ties? Did ancient societies exist where being on your own or living in very different kinds of groups was just how things were done? Science has uncovered amazing things about our ancestors, but some puzzles remain stubbornly unsolved, especially when it comes to how people really lived their private lives. Get ready to explore 7 lost communities where the ideas of singleness, partnership, and who you share your home with might have been very different, and where science is still looking for all the answers. Number 7. The Picts and their mysterious matrilineal puzzle. Imagine a group of people in ancient Scotland, fierce warriors who painted their bodies before battle, so distinctive that even the Romans wrote about them. These were the Picts. They lived in northern and eastern Scotland from the late Iron Age right through to the early Middle Ages, roughly from the 3rd to the 9th centuries. We know they were skilled farmers, talented artisans who created beautiful and intricate stone carvings, and formidable opponents to anyone who tried to conquer them. Their legacy is scattered across the Scottish landscape in the form of these amazing symbol stones, covered in enigmatic carvings of animals, mythical beasts, and abstract designs. But here is the kicker. They left behind no written records of their own that we can decipher. Most of what we think we know about them comes from outsiders, like the Romans, or from later writers looking back. So, what is the big mystery about how the Picts lived, and what does it have to do with individuals or family structures? One of the most debated aspects of Pictish society is how they chose their leaders, particularly their kings. A much later writer, the Venerable Bede, writing in the 8th century, mentioned that the Picts, when in doubt about succession, would choose a king from the female royal line rather than the male. This has led to a theory known as matrilineal succession. In simple terms, this means that power or lineage might have been traced through the mother's side of the family, not the father's. If your uncle on your mother's side was king, you might have a better claim to the throne than the king's own son. Think about what that could mean for society. If who your mother was mattered more for inheritance or status than who your father was, it could change everything about family dynamics. Would marriage have been the same as in societies where the father's line is all important? What was the roles of men if succession passed through women? Did women hold more power or influence in daily life because of this? These are huge questions, and the evidence is thin on the ground. The symbol stones themselves do not tell us directly about their family lives or social rules. Some scholars argue strongly for matrilineal succession based on king lists and Bede's account, while others think the evidence is too weak or misinterpreted. They point out that Bede was writing from an Anglo-Saxon perspective which was patrilineal, and he might have misunderstood or been describing an idealized or emergency situation. The challenge for science is that without the Picts' own voices, their own writings explaining their customs, we are left piecing things together from fragments. Archaeological digs can tell us about their houses, their forts, their crafts, and their diet. We can see that they lived in roundhouses later, in more rectangular timber halls, and they built impressive hill forts. Their art is unique and powerful. Art and house foundations do not directly spell out marriage customs or the social standing of unmarried individuals. If Pictish society was indeed matrilineal, it would have profoundly affected who was considered kin, how property was passed down, and perhaps even the emotional bonds and loyalties within families. It might mean that a woman's brothers were more significant figures in her children's lives than their biological father, This raises questions about the individuals within such a system. Were there roles for men and women that fell outside of direct procreation and traditional family building, yet still held status because of their maternal lineage? Did this system create a different kind of social fabric where the single individual, especially a male not in the direct line of maternal succession, or a female whose children were key to lineage, had a distinct and perhaps powerful place? We simply do not have enough detailed information. Picts gradually merged with the Gaelic Scots, forming the Kingdom of Alba, the precursor to modern Scotland, and their distinct language and many of their unique customs faded into history. The stones remain silent witnesses to a people whose intimate social world, science, still struggles to fully reconstruct, leaving us to wonder about the lives and relationships of these painted people. Number 6. The Guanches and their island relationship riddles. Way out in the Atlantic Ocean, off the northwest coast of Africa, lie the Canary Islands. Long before Spanish conquerors arrived in the 15th century, these islands were home to a unique people known as the Guanches. They were of Berber origin from North Africa, and they had lived in isolation on these volcanic islands for perhaps 2,000 years or even more. Because they were cut off from mainland developments, they had a culture that was, in many ways, a Stone Age culture, even though they lived into the time of steel swords and gunpowder in Europe. They lived in caves and simple stone huts, herded goats and sheep, cultivated barley, and had a complex system of beliefs. They are also famous for mummifying some of their dead, a practice that shows a deep concern for the afterlife. When Europeans arrived, they were fascinated and often perplexed by Guanche customs. Unfortunately, much of Guanche culture was destroyed or heavily altered during and after the conquest. What we know comes from archaeological finds and from the chronicles written by the Spanish, as well as a few later writers who tried to record surviving traditions. These accounts, it is important to remember, were often written by people who saw the Guanches as primitive or savage, so their descriptions can be biased or misunderstood. Still, they offer tantalizing glimpses into a very different way of life. One of the most intriguing aspects that some of these early chroniclers noted concerned Guanche practices around relationships and marriage, which seemed to vary from island to island. On some islands, for example, there were reports of a system that sounds like polyandry, where one woman could have multiple husbands. This is a rare practice globally, and if it was indeed common in parts of the Canaries, it would have created a very different social dynamic compared to the monogamous or polygynous, one man, multiple wives, systems prevalent elsewhere. What would this mean for the individuals involved? How were households structured? How were children raised and paternal lineage determined, if at all, in such a system? Other accounts speak of periods of sexual liberty for young people before they settled into more permanent unions. Some describe special houses where unmarried women lived, or particular social rules about interactions between men and women of different social classes. For instance, on one island it was said that noble women could choose partners from lower classes, but any children would belong to the mother's noble lineage. There were also mentions of women holding significant respect or even authority in certain spheres. The specifics are often hazy and sometimes contradictory, which is part of the problem for scientists and historians trying to get a clear picture. Science struggles to fully explain these aspects of Guanche society for several reasons. Firstly, the conquest was brutal, and much of the indigenous population and their culture were lost. Secondly, the written accounts are external and filtered. They might exaggerate unusual customs to make their stories more exotic, or they might misunderstand what they were seeing through their own cultural lens. Archaeology can tell us about their tools, their diet, their burial practices, like the mummification, and their settlements, but it is very hard to dig up direct evidence of marriage rules or the social status of unmarried individuals. We can find out if people were buried alone or in groups, but what that meant socially is open to interpretation. The Guanches were not a community of singles, in the sense of everyone being unmarried. They clearly had ways of forming families and raising children. But the hints in the historical records suggest that their approach to partnerships, to premarital relationships, and possibly to the roles of men and women within those partnerships might have been far more varied and flexible than the rigid systems often imposed by their conquerors. If polyandry existed, it would mean that many men in those specific relationships were, in a sense, sharing a wife, and their individual status as a husband was different from a monogamous context. The role and autonomy of women in such systems are also key questions, because their unique island world was so thoroughly disrupted and then absorbed. Many of the precise details of how Guanche individuals navigated their social and romantic lives remain tantalizingly out of reach, a lost system that science can only glimpse through a distorted glass. We are left wondering about the true diversity of their relationship structures and the lives of those who lived within them before their world changed forever. Number 5. Skara Bray's Stone Village and its Secrets of Cohabitation. Picture a village, not of wood or mud brick, but almost entirely made of stone, nestled by the wind-swept coast of Orkney in Scotland. This is Skara Bray, a Neolithic settlement that was inhabited for around 600 years, from about 3180 BC to 2500 BC. What makes Skara Bray so incredible is its state of preservation. For thousands of years it lay buried under sand dunes, forgotten, until a massive storm in 1850 stripped away the grass and revealed its secrets. What emerged was a cluster of houses linked by covered passageways, with stone beds, stone dressers, and even stone tanks in the floor, possibly for keeping live fish bait. It is like stepping directly into the Stone Age. The village consists of about 8 houses, all remarkably similar in design. Each has a large square room with a central hearth. On either side of the hearth, built against the walls, are stone box beds. The dressers are stone shells set against the wall opposite the entrance. These were not just functional. Some stones are decorated with carved patterns. The uniformity is striking. It suggests a community that was quite egalitarian, without big differences in wealth or status displayed in their homes. One building is slightly different and larger and does not have the box beds. Its purpose is debated, perhaps a workshop or a communal space. So what is the mystery here concerning how people lived together, and how does it relate to individuals? The big question science still grapples with is the nature of the households that occupied these stone dwellings. Were these nuclear families, a mother, a father, and their children in each house? Or was it something else entirely? The stone beds are of different sizes. Some are quite small. This has led to speculation about who slept where. Were children separated from adults? Did couples share a bed? Or did individuals sleep alone? The artifacts found within the houses, pottery, bone, tools, beads, gaming, dice, tell us about their daily activities and crafts, but not directly about their family structure or relationship rules. The layout of the village, with its interconnected houses, suggests a close-knit community. But how close? Did they share resources? Did they cook and eat together in a larger communal way? Or was each house an independent unit? Some researchers have suggested that the emphasis might have been more on the community as a whole, rather than individual family units. If that were the case, the role and identity of an individual might be defined more by their contribution to the group than by their marital status or number of offspring. Think about it. In a society where homes are so similar and life seems so communal, what did being single or being partnered actually mean? If the community was the primary social unit, perhaps the distinctions we make were less important. The burial practices of people from this period in Orkney are also interesting. They often used large communal chambered tombs where the bones of many individuals were placed together over generations. This can make it hard to identify individual family groups in death, just as it is hard to define them in life at Skara Brae. Sometimes bones were moved around or sorted, suggesting complex rituals that we do not fully understand. Science cannot definitively answer these questions because the evidence is mute on these specific social details. We have the stage, the incredibly well-preserved village, but the actors and their script are gone. We can make educated guesses based on other Neolithic societies, but Skara Brae is unique in many ways. There are no written records from this time, so we cannot ask the people of Skara Brae themselves. The very design of the houses, with their fixed stone furniture, suggests a very traditional and perhaps rigid way of life passed down through generations. But what were those traditions when it came to forming partnerships, raising children, or the roles of individuals who might not have fit into a simple husband-wife-children model? Were there elders who lived alone but were cared for by the community? Were there young adults who had not yet formed partnerships but played vital roles? The standardized houses do not give us easy clues to different types of households. It is a snapshot of a very organized, very established way of life. But the personal rules, the emotions, the individual stories, and particularly how they structured their closest relationships remain locked within the stones. Skara Brae offers a beautiful but frustratingly incomplete picture of a lost way of living together. Number 4. The Songtse people and their alien bronze world. Deep in the heart of China, in Sichuan province, lies a mystery that has rewritten the history of Chinese civilization. In 1986, workers at a brickyard accidentally stumbled upon 2 large sacrificial pits filled with astonishing artifacts dating back to around the 12th-11th centuries BC, roughly the time of the Shang dynasty. But these were unlike anything ever seen from the Shang or any other known Chinese culture of the period. This was the Sangxingdui civilization. We do not even know what they called themselves. Sangxingdui is the modern name of the archaeological site. What they unearthed was breathtaking and, frankly, a bit eerie. There were monumental bronze heads, some with enigmatic smiles, others with strangely protruding eyes. There was a giant standing bronze figure, nearly 9 feet tall. There were fantastical bronze masks, some covered in gold leaf with giant ears and other worldly features. There were bronze trees with birds and dragons, elephant tusks, and thousands of jade and gold items. This was clearly a highly sophisticated Bronze Age culture, capable of incredible artistry and metalworking. But who were they? Where did they come from? And, most puzzlingly, where did they go? The Sangxingdui civilization seems to have flourished for several centuries and then vanished abruptly. Their city, a large walled settlement, was abandoned. The amazing artifacts in the pits appear to have been deliberately broken or burned and then buried, perhaps as part of a ritual decommissioning of their sacred objects before they left, or perhaps in a moment of crisis, but we do not know why. There are no written records from Sangxingdui itself that we can read. While ancient China had writing at this time, the Shang oracle bones, no similar texts have been found at Sangxingdui, or if they exist, they are in a script we do not recognize. This complete lack of their own textual voice makes understanding their society, including their social structures, incredibly difficult. What kind of people created these unique, almost alien-looking bronzes? Art style is so distinct from contemporary Chinese cultures that it suggests they had their own independent traditions, beliefs, and perhaps a very different worldview. When a culture produces such unique representations of what appear to be deities, ancestors, or shamans, It hints at a unique spiritual life. And spiritual life is often deeply intertwined with social organization. So, what can we even guess about their family lives or the roles of individuals? Absolutely nothing with certainty. This is where the science can't fully explain. Part becomes massive. We have these stunning objects, but the people themselves are like ghosts. Did their unique belief system, as hinted at by the bronzes, lead to unusual social roles? Were the people depicted in the giant statues and masks gods, rulers, or priests? If they were priests or shamans, did they live differently from ordinary people? Were they perhaps celibate, or did they have special status that set them apart from typical family units? In many cultures, individuals dedicated to religious or ritual duties live under specific rules that might include not marrying or having children. Could this have been the case for some in Sangsa-Kindui? Without texts or even depictions of daily life, most of the art is ceremonial or symbolic. We have no direct insight into their homes, their family groupings, or their personal relationships. Did they live in nuclear families, extended families, communal groups? We do not know. The sheer investment in these elaborate bronzes suggests a society that could mobilize significant resources and specialized labor. This implies some form of social hierarchy. But how was that hierarchy structured? Was it based on lineage, on religious authority, on craft skills? The mystery of Sangsa-Kindui is not just about their amazing art or their disappearance. It is about their entire way of life. Because they are so enigmatic, so different, it is tempting to imagine that their social customs might have been just as unique as their bronzes. Could a society that produced such otherworldly art have had equally unconventional ideas about human relationships, about the roles of men and women, or about the status of individuals who did not follow a standard path of marriage and procreation? Science can analyze the bronze, date the Picts, map the city, but it cannot yet penetrate the minds or the social rules of the Sangsa-Kindui people. They remain a profound enigma, a lost civilization whose personal lives are a complete blank slate, leaving us to wonder if their society held answers to questions about human social diversity that we have not even thought to ask. Number 3. The builders of Göbek Tepe and their pre-farming social puzzle. Let us travel back in time, way back, to over 11,500 years ago. This is an era long before pottery, before writing, even before agriculture, had really taken hold in most places. People were predominantly hunter-gatherers, living in small, mobile bands, or so we thought. Then came the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. This site has turned our understanding of early human history on its head. Göbekli Tepe is a complex of massive, beautifully carved stone pillars arranged in circles. Some pillars weigh many tons and are adorned with intricate reliefs of animals: foxes, snakes, boars, cranes, lions. It is the oldest known megalithic structure in the world, a kind of cathedral on a hill built by people who, according to traditional timelines, should not have been capable of such organized, monumental construction. The sheer scale of Göbekli Tepe is astounding. Quarrying, transporting, and erecting these T-shaped pillars, some standing over 18 feet tall, would have required a huge, coordinated labor force, likely drawn from many different hunter-gatherer groups across the region. They would have needed planners, engineers, skilled stone masons, and a lot of people to do the heavy lifting. And they did this for centuries, building new circular enclosures and then, strangely, deliberately burying the older ones. This went on for over 1,000 years before the site was eventually abandoned and completely covered over. The big mystery is, who were these people, And how did they organize themselves to achieve this? Hunter-gatherer societies are typically thought to be small-scale and egalitarian, without strong leaders or complex social hierarchies. Yet Göbekli Tepe screams of organization, shared purpose, and sustained effort over generations. This has led scientists to rethink the capabilities and social complexity of pre-agricultural societies. What brought these people together? Was it a shared religion, a pilgrimage center, a place for rituals and feasts? The animal carvings and the lack of evidence for permanent habitation on the hilltop itself suggest it was primarily a ceremonial site. Now, how does this relate to individuals and their social roles, possibly outside typical family structures? To build something like Göbekli Tepe, you would need more than just muscle. You would need specialists. Were there master carvers who dedicated their lives to this art? Were there shamans or priests who directed the rituals and perhaps oversaw the construction, possessing knowledge passed down through generations? If such specialized roles existed, did the individuals fulfilling them live differently? In many later societies, people with important ritual or craft knowledge were sometimes set apart, perhaps living celibate lives or having a status that was not defined by conventional family ties, but by their sacred duties or unique skills. Could it be that the intense communal effort required for Göbekli Tepe fostered new kinds of social arrangements? Perhaps individuals were identified more by their role in these grand communal projects than by their place in a small family band. The effort of building and maintaining such a site might have required a level of social cohesion and individual dedication that transcended simple kinship. We have found no houses for permanent residents at Göbekli Tepe itself. Though there are signs of feasting, huge numbers of animal bones, suggesting large gatherings. This implies people came from surrounding areas, worked, feasted, performed rituals, and then perhaps dispersed again or lived in nearby settlements yet to be fully explored. Science cannot fully explain the social structure of the Göbekli Tepe builders because the evidence is so unique and groundbreaking. We have the stunning monuments, but very little direct evidence of their daily lives, their homes, or their specific beliefs beyond what can be inferred from the carvings. There are no written records, of course, as writing was thousands of years in the future. The human remains found at the site are fragmented and still under study, so they have not yet revealed clear clues about social differentiation or family groupings. Did the shared work and ritual at Göbekli Tepe create a society where certain individuals, perhaps those with spiritual power or artistic talent, held a unique status, possibly living outside the norms of hunter-gatherer family life as we usually understand it? Were there people who were in a sense married to their sacred duties at this incredible place? The very existence of Göbekli Tepe challenges our assumptions about what hunter-gatherers could do and how they might have lived. It suggests that complex ritual and social organization might have preceded agriculture, not followed it. This leaves a huge open question about the lives of the individuals who made it happen. Their society was clearly capable of immense creativity and cooperation, but the personal rules, the relationships, and the roles of individuals within that society remain one of archaeology's most profound and captivating mysteries. We are left to marvel at their achievement and wonder about the unnamed people whose lives were dedicated to creating this first temple. Number 2. Çatalhöyük and its confounding communal living. Imagine a town, or maybe it is better to call it a proto-city, from about 9,500 years ago, in what is now Turkey. This is Çatalhöyük, one of the largest and best-preserved Neolithic sites ever found. It was a sprawling settlement of mud brick houses, packed incredibly tightly together, with no streets or alleyways. People entered their homes through openings in the roofs, climbing down ladders. It was like a human honeycomb. At its peak, thousands of people might have lived here. They were early farmers, growing crops and herding animals, but also still hunting and gathering. They made pottery, wove textiles, and created striking art, including wall paintings of hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and voluptuous female figurines. What is truly puzzling about Catalhoyuk is its social organization. Despite its size and density, there are no obvious public buildings, no clear signs of a central authority or ruler, no palaces or grand temples that stand out from the rest. The houses are remarkably similar in size and layout, suggesting a highly egalitarian society, at least in terms of material wealth displayed in architecture. People lived in these houses generation after generation, and when someone died, they were often buried under the floors of the houses, sometimes beneath the sleeping platforms. This practice of burying the dead within the home, literally living with your ancestors, suggests a strong connection to place and lineage. But what kind of lineage? And what kind of family? This is where things get really interesting and challenge our modern notions. While people were buried in the houses, studies of the human remains have shown that not everyone buried together in a house was necessarily genetically related in a simple nuclear family pattern. Sometimes individuals buried closely together showed no direct biological links. This suggests that household or family at Catalhoyuk might have meant something different from a mother, father, and their children. Perhaps households were more like small, tight-knit collectives, groups of people who lived together, worked together, and shared ritual life, bound by ties that were not solely based on blood or marriage in the way we understand it. If households were not strictly nuclear families, what did that mean for individuals? How were partnerships formed? What was the role of a person who might not have had children, or who was not part of a procreating pair? In a society that appears so communal, perhaps individual identity was less tied to marital status and more to one's role within the collective household and the wider community. The famous female figurines found at Catalhoyuk, often depicted as heavy-breasted and wide-hipped, have led to much speculation about the role of women and a possible focus on fertility or motherhood. But were these representations of goddesses, ancestors, or ideals of womanhood? And did this translate into specific social power or roles for women? Some researchers argue for a society where women held significant status, while others are more cautious, pointing out that interpreting such figurines is complex. The very architecture of Catalhoyuk, with its rooftop entrances and interconnected dwellings, implies a high degree of cooperation and social intimacy. You had to walk across your neighbors' roofs to get to your own home. This must have required a strong set of social rules and a shared understanding of communal living. Did this unique living arrangement foster different kinds of relationships? Perhaps the bonds within a house or between neighboring houses were as important, or even more important, than marital bonds. Science struggles to fully explain the social dynamics of Catalhoyuk because the material evidence, while rich, is ambiguous when it comes to the specifics of relationships and family structures. We have the houses, the burials, the artifacts, the art, but no written records to tell us their kinship terms, their marriage rules, or their inheritance patterns. Archaeologists meticulously excavate, analyze human remains for DNA and isotopes to learn about diet and movement, and study the placement of artifacts, but reconstructing the social software from the physical hardware is a huge challenge. Egalitarian nature of the settlement, the unusual burial practices, and the communal living arrangements all point to a society that may have organized itself very differently from later, more hierarchical urban societies. It is possible that in Catalhoyuk, the concept of a single individual, in the sense of being outside a core family unit, might have been less defined or less significant if the primary social unit was the collective household or the community itself. Were there individuals who chose not to partner or who played specialized roles like artists or ritual specialists? that placed them in a unique position within this communal structure. We can only speculate. Catalhoyuk remains a fascinating enigma, a place that forces us to question our assumptions about what it means to live together and form a society, and what family might have meant to these ancient people. Number 1. The Qumran community and the Desert Scrolls of Celibacy. High on a dry plateau overlooking the Dead Sea lie the ruins of Qumran. This ancient settlement is world-famous, not for its stones, but for what was found in the nearby caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These hundreds of ancient manuscripts dating from around the 3rd century BC to the 1st century and include the oldest known copies of books from the Hebrew Bible, as well as many other religious texts, rules, and prophecies from a Jewish group that lived a communal life apart from mainstream society in Jerusalem. For decades, the dominant theory has been that Qumran was the home of a sect known as the Essenes, a group described by ancient historians like Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder. What makes the people of Qumran likely Essenes particularly relevant to our theme is what these ancient writers, and some interpretations of the scrolls themselves, suggest about their lifestyle. A significant number of them may have practiced celibacy. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, had described a community of Essenes living near the Dead Sea as a solitary race, remarkable because they lived without any women, without liben, love sexual intercourse, without money. He noted with some amazement that their numbers were kept up by a constant stream of newcomers who were weary of life and drawn to their customs. Josephus also mentioned that while there was one order of Essenes that did marry for procreation, another larger order rejected marriage and pleasure, believing women were generally faithless and disruptive to a communal life focused on piety and purity. If this is true, Qumran could represent a significant community where many individuals, particularly men, chose a life without marriage and family in the traditional sense. The archaeological evidence at Qumran itself lends some support to this idea. The settlement includes communal dining halls, ritual baths, mikvot for purification, a scriptorium where scrolls may have been copied, and a cemetery. Excavations of the main cemetery at Qumran have revealed that the vast majority of individuals buried there were adult males. While some female and child burials have been found, they are far fewer in number and sometimes in separate areas, leading many scholars to believe the core community was indeed predominantly male and perhaps celibate. The Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, particularly texts like the community rule, Serek Hayahad, lay out strict rules for those joining the community, emphasizing communal ownership of property, obedience to leaders, shared meals, and a life dedicated to the study of law and preparation for an apocalyptic end of days. While the community rule does not explicitly mandate celibacy for all, its focus on purity and separation from the perceived corruption of the outside world, including what they might have seen as the entanglements of family life for some, could be consistent with such a practice. However, science cannot fully explain Qumran and its inhabitants. The identification of Qumran residents solely as Essenes and the extent of celibacy are still debated by some scholars. Some argue that Qumran was a fortress, a villa, or a pottery production center, and that the scrolls were hidden in the caves by refugees from Jerusalem and did not necessarily originate with a celibate community living at Qumran. Others suggest that even if it was an Essene community, marriage might have been more common than the traditional view allows, or that celibacy was a temporary phase or an ideal for a select group within the community. Presence of female and child graves, however few, needs explanation if it was an exclusively male celibate group. Were these the wives and children of a marrying order of Essenes, or perhaps visitors, or people from a different period of occupation? The motivations for such a lifestyle, if predominantly celibate, are also profound. Was it a rejection of worldly pleasures to achieve spiritual purity? Was it part of an apocalyptic belief system where forming new families was seen as pointless in the face of an imminent end times? The scrolls speak of a new covenant and a community of holiness, suggesting a deep desire to live a life perfectly aligned with their interpretation of God's will. For individuals within such a community, their primary identity and commitment would have been to the group and its religious ideals rather than to a spouse or personal family. This would have created a unique social dynamic, a brotherhood, if mostly male, bound by shared faith, rules, and expectations. The lost aspect of Qumran is that the community and its unique way of life came to an end, likely during the First Jewish-Roman War in 68 AD when the settlement was destroyed by Roman legions. Their texts, hidden in the caves, survived as a silent testament. But the lived experience, the day-to-day realities of a community that may have largely forgone marriage and family for spiritual pursuits, remains something science pieces together from texts, ruins, and bones. Qumran community, if it was indeed a large group of celibate men awaiting the end of days, stands as a fascinating example of a lost community that organized itself around principles profoundly different from the societal norms of their time and ours, offering a glimpse into a world where being single was not just an individual state, but potentially a collective, religiously motivated choice, but potentially of life. The full story, with all its nuances, continues to be a subject of intense research and debate.